All right, and for last week's review of the market, let's cross over now to Temple. Temple, good morning.
We're positive again. Last week, we did some kind of movement back from 22,000 psychological threshold for the all-share index now to 23,000. We settled at 23,021.01, which is a positive of 1.87% here, and that brought us back close to 12 trillion naira in terms of the equity capitalization of the stock exchange. Now, if you look at the volume of transactions, it was also positive, even though it was not as much as we had in the preceding week. Last week, we had done some 1.9 million units of shares, but the preceding week rather, we did some 1.9 million units of shares. But last week we did some 1.012 billion. Now, in terms of the value of the transactions, it was higher than what we did in the preceding week. For last week, it was 9.82 billion naira for the entire transaction that we saw last week. Deals was 17,023. Around the same figure that we did for the preceding week. And if you look at the volume of transaction, key contributors as usual was the financial services sector. And we know that Access Bank, UBA, and of course, FBN Holdings were the major contributors to what we had here. All of that contributed some 414 million units to the entire transaction that we have around here, Chimezie.
Well, Temple, I guess you still have your analyst to talk to you there.
True. Great. So Charles Fakroga, who is the chief dealer with Citicode Securities and Investment, joins us now for some brief analysis, actually. Mr. Fakroga, thank you for joining us this morning. Mr. Fakroga?
Yes, Temple, thank you for having me.
Great. So, given what we saw last week, we're back to some 23,000 psychological position in terms of the key benchmark index. Now that we are seeing the lockdown easing commencing from today, what is that likely to give to the markets, to equities specifically?
Yes. Anyway, you are aware that even during the lockdown, we're still doing our normal trading. But with the easing of the lockdown, we will see more and more investors will come. And of course, those of them who do not have those other alternative channels are going to come out. And in fact, for some time, they'll not be able to talk to their broker or see their broker. They will want to come and see physically. So we're going to be experiencing increase in volume and increase in transactions as the lockdown begins to ease.
Does this mean that brokers are back on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange, or you're still doing more of remote trading?
Well, brokers have been trading remotely using their smartphone and trading from whatever they are. But with this ease of lockdown, yes, we might see 1 or 2, 3 brokers who want to come to this floor. But of course, at the same time, the exchange has a strict policy in terms of social distance. So it is only those that are necessary that will be allowed into the trading arena. Maybe they have 1 or 2 issues. Like I'll just tell you, we are supposed to commence a training, but it's going to be done online. So the few traders that will be coming will have been approved, and they are still going to observe strict social distancing even when they get to the stock exchange.
All right, Mr. Charles Fakroga, chief dealer with Citicode Investment and Securities. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us as the lockdown eases. We wish you the best of the trading day today. Back to you now, Chimezie.
An opening call to London as well as the debt and currency market after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Well, still on this segment, we'll still have to get back to the market with the debt and currency markets update there. Temple is still on standby to update us on what happened last week. Temple.
True. So talking about the debt market now, these are bonds numbers for Friday specifically, even though we know that for the greater part of last week, we saw more of bearish sentiments across the board, even though a bit as well, a bit of some transactions were recorded across the short and the mid end of the curve. With the longer end of the curve, we didn't see so much of activities towards the tail end of last week. We know that as the market opened, because again, it was a 4-day trading week, as the market opened, investors quickly took actions on some of the on some of the major papers that you have on the bond side of the markets, given the fact that the federal government has now made up its mind to localize its 850 billion naira borrowing that it had earlier localized. Last week, all of that came through to the market, and of course, the DMO announced that to the capital market community. So dealers began to digest that and took advantage of some of the papers that already had low yields. But basically, for Friday, this was what we saw: 78 deals in total, and that's for a value of 144.67 billion naira. We know that investors indicated interest in this key paper, which is at the longer end of the curve, and of course 2023 at the shorter end of the curve. Then we see this 2029 paper at the mid end of the curve. And this week, folks are expecting that sort of pattern that we saw, trading pattern that we saw last week, will probably, reinvent itself again on this space next week, this week rather. Now for the Treasury bills end of things, these are the papers. A lot of investors, local players more specifically, have actually been giving cold shoulder to this side of the market. On Friday only, we saw just these two bills exchanging what level of transaction, just 12 deals around in total for the whole side of the market. And 11 of the 12 deals actually transpired at the shorter end of, at the longer end of things, which is the 29th of April 2021. And we had just one deal recorded against the April 1, 2021 paper. But if you look at the OMO end of things, for a greater part of these bills, actually, we know that investors actually sold down. And that's where we saw that yields actually expanded further because, again, the interest of investors in these papers or the interest of dealers had actually waned. Now, we know as well that there was a 30 billion naira OMO primary market auction that held last week, pushed out by the Central Bank of Nigeria. I think the subscription was really positive by over 333% last week. So secondary markets got the beating because, again, a lot of the dealers had to shift their attention to that end of the paper. But we have Mr. Gbenga Shonaike joining us now from Access Bank. He is a fixed income dealer with Access Bank. Good morning, Mr. Shonaike. Mr. Shonaike?
Hello, please go ahead.
Right. Okay. Good morning. It's really good to have you on the program this morning, knowing that, yes, the lockdown has been relaxed, and of course we do expect that dealers and treasurers now will be back physically at work and no more of remote trading. But basically, what's the outlook for this week, knowing that for the greater part of last week, the market actually opened a bit bullish, but it ended quite bearish?
Let's speak up a bit.
Looks like we're having an issue with that. Okay, we'll try to reconnect to Gbenga Shonaike eventually. But talking about equities again, we have a couple of earnings that investors will be tracking for this week. First of all, some of the corporate benefits that we have right now in the market that a lot of the investors are watching include Dangote Cement. Dangote Cement is trading at 130 naira in the market. And we know that the dividend payout that has been proposed by investors is now 16 naira. The qualification date for this particular dividend is May 25th of this month. Nestle is another equity that investors are also tracking. They're paying out 45 naira, and they've got May 12th as the qualification dates. Now it's hovering around 900 and 1,000 naira in share price. Julius Berger is doing 2 naira to investors, and it's gotten May 15th as the qualification date. These are papers that investors are tracking, or these are equities rather that investors are tracking at this point in time. Okomu Oil also declared its earnings for 2019, and of course they're doing 2 naira to investors. Now this is one other security that a lot of investors will be watching. Seplat is paying out 50 cents because this is listed on Nigerian Stock Exchange, and of course the London Stock Exchange and Nigerian Stock Exchange. So you'll see some investors, looking that way. In terms of the numbers that we have, some of these numbers actually came in last week, even though what we're seeing now in the banking space is not looking so impressive, going by the numbers that have been declared. Gross earnings for Fidelity Bank, for example, came in at 51.15 billion naira compared to what they did in the preceding year. This is not so good, but we know that there's a marginal decline in the EPS, that's the earnings per share for Fidelity Bank, from 21 kobo to 20 kobo. And all of the reasons for all of this is not far-fetched. We all know that for the greater part of Q1 2020, so far, things haven't been very impressive. A lot of FPIs, foreign portfolio investors, have remained risk-off since the outbreak of coronavirus in the global economy. And all of these began to affect quite a number of companies. And Fidelity Bank, which is actually fond of delivering positive numbers, wasn't left out of that came from there. Quite a number of other metrics for this particular number, for this particular company, actually came in positive. Let's look at MTN. MTN declared 329.17 billion naira in profit, that's in revenue rather. Of course, operating profit was lower, 111.29 billion naira. And we know that the profit after tax was positive, 51.14 billion. Now, earnings per share jumped up to 2 naira 51 kobo. I understand we have Gbenga Shonaike back online. Gbenga Shonaike, a fixed income dealer with Access Bank. Thank you for joining us this morning on the program.
Glad to be here. Good morning.
So we know that the markets changed. Bonds and treasury bills were bearish for the greater part of last week, even though things opened, quite positive last week. But what's the outlook for this week, given the lockdown that has been relaxed now, and knowing that you guys are now back physically at work?
Okay, to be honest, there's very change with the system this week in terms of T-bills maturity. So we should expect the market to be a bit more cautious. Also, given the fact that we know that DMO and federal government is looking to raise a lot of money through the local market as opposed to the foreign market. So irrespective of where we see liquidity, we still see that there's still going to be much more borrowings coming in the future. So we expect a bit more cautiousness in the market. People probably true with that at the back of their mind. But net on net, we still expect some positive sentiments on buying. There's still a lot more liquidity in the system. Currently, we saw some payments ending of last week, so we expect that to also take hold opening this week.
Okay, talking about the 850 billion naira initially externalized borrowing of the federal government, which the DMO has now announced to operators like you that now this is going to be localized. We know basically that for the Q2 calendar that has been reeled out by the DMO, some 75 to 165 billion naira was what they intended to raise for this period. How much of expectations do you have around what the 850 billion naira will do to the market?
To be honest, in what way would I put it? We expect the DMO, of course, as the auction comes nearer, they'll release their offer circular. We expect that it would slightly increase the offerings on those specific maturities. Also, what you've seen in the past, last couple of months, is that there's been significant subscription for these bonds. So I don't think there will be so much of any pressure on the borrowing side. I think the local market is poised to raise that money, given the lack of avenues for investments generally in the market today. Locals can buy automobiles, so there's not a lot of avenues to do your investments. We still see that they're still positive in terms of raising that as much as they can. And we will see it over subscriptions like last month, but
looks like we lost Mr. Shonaike again there. Well, back here again, we know that for this week, now that the lockdown is over, it's been relaxed and faced. We know that a lot of traders are back in their offices. Dealers and treasurers will begin trading physically, and of course, they will be able to interface more, and perhaps that will change the level of participation in the market going forward. Chimezie.
Thank you very much, Temple. Well, we hope for a profitable trading day and, of course, trading week. In the meantime, let's continue to stay safe. Thank you. And that's a wrap on the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimezie Obi Iwagu.